Martin Cole removed his wife's headphones in the middle of the 10th anniversary broadcast, handed her microphone to Bianca Vale, and told the city that Elena Ruiz's way of telling stories belonged to the past. Then Bianca repeated Elena's signature greeting. Under the red glow of the on-air sign, the message was unmistakable. A husband had chosen a younger woman. A respected host had been replaced on the program she had spent 10 years building. A marriage had ended live on the radio. That was the scandal the listeners understood. It was not the reason Elena refused to leave. As Bianca settled into her chair, Elena saw a folder beside the microphone. Archive conversion. Inside were names she recognized from 10 years of interviews, workers, tenants, shop owners, drivers, caregivers, and people who had shared their worst moments only because Elena had promised they would never be turned into spectacle. Several names were marked approved. Elena knew at least 2 of them had refused. Martin ordered security to escort her out. He announced live that the program, its recordings, and every voice captured by the station belonged to management. Behind the control room glass, Daniel Shaw froze with one hand above the cutoff switch. Elena did not ask him to save her job. She pointed to the auxiliary line. Then she looked at Martin. "Did you tell them what they were agreeing to?" Martin smiled as though jealousy had finally made her irrational. But Bianca looked down at the folder. For the first time, her confidence slipped. At 9:15, the station was scheduled to broadcast 3 of those archived voices. At midnight, something far larger would become permanent. The public thought Elena was fighting not to be replaced. They had not yet realized she was trying to stop hundreds of people from being used. 90 minutes earlier, Elena had stood alone in Studio A with a grease pencil in one hand and 10 years of other people's lives arranged across the wall. There were photographs from winter coat drives, thank you cards, and faded snapshots of guests who had once entered the station expecting to be judged. Most had left surprised that someone had let them finish a sentence. Elena moved a photograph of Rosa Bennett closer to the center of the anniversary display. Rosa stood in front of her corner bakery, flour on her apron and one hand resting on the door she had nearly been forced to close. 5 years earlier, Elena had given her 12 minutes on air to explain why a sudden rent increase would destroy the shop. By the end of that week, customers had formed a line around the block. Elena's phone buzzed with a voice message. 10 years, Rosa said over the sound of metal trays. You better not spend the whole show thanking us. Half this town owes you a thank you first. Elena smiled and saved the recording for the final hour. Another message waited from Malik Grant, a delivery driver who had once spoken on the program after an accident left him unable to work. He promised to call during the anniversary broadcast, though his dispatcher had changed his route again. Those were the voices Elena wanted that night. Not polished testimonials edited until everyone sounded grateful in the same way. She wanted the uneven pauses and background noise that proved real lives had existed before the station turned them into audio. Martin entered carrying a white folder and 2 paper cups. He set black coffee beside her without asking. He still remembered that much. We need the archive modernization form tonight, he said. Elena looked at the folder but did not touch it. You said legal was revising the language. They did. Then, why does the cover still say third-party distribution? Martin exhaled. The station may license selected material to larger platforms. That is how growth works. Approved by the people in the recordings? They already signed releases. They signed for this program and station rebroadcasts. That is not the same as giving an outside company permanent rights. Martin glanced at the display wall without settling on a single face. These people came here because the station gave them reach, he said. They came because they trusted what we told them. They trusted the brand. Elena set down the grease pencil. Martin tapped the folder against his palm. Sign before airtime. We cannot carry informal arrangements forever. Before she could answer, Daniel Shaw called from the control room. Daniel had spent 16 years making other people sound composed. On his monitor, the evening routing schedule showed the primary call-in board, delay system, emergency feed, and an older auxiliary line used during storms. A red block covered the auxiliary channel at 7:05 p.m. Scheduled maintenance? Elena asked. Daniel shook his head. Not mine. Martin appeared behind them. We are simplifying the signal path. You do not remove the backup after a live broadcast begins, Daniel said. It is being retired. Tonight? Martin's tone cooled. Use the primary board. He walked away with the unsigned folder. Daniel waited until Martin was out of hearing range. That shutdown order was entered yesterday with administrative access. Whose? The log only shows the management account. Music started in Studio B, Elena's music, the 4-note piano introduction that had opened every episode since the program's second year. She crossed the hall and found Bianca Vale seated at the secondary console with Elena's microphone in front of her. Bianca wore a new station badge and headphones Elena had never seen. She leaned toward the microphone. "Good evening," Bianca said, matching Elena's familiar pause. "Wherever you are in this city, there is room for your story here." Bianca looked through the glass and saw Elena in the doorway. For half a second, embarrassment crossed her face. Then she removed the headphones and smiled. "Martin asked me to test levels for the sponsor inserts. With my opening? He said it would help Daniel compare the sound." Bianca gathered several pages from the desk. One slipped free and landed near Elena's shoe. "The future of our city. 9:15 p.m. 3 archive identification numbers appeared beneath the title. Bianca picked up the page before Elena could read the names. "Just a temporary rundown," she said. Elena's phone vibrated. "Did you send me another permission form?" The message was from Malik. A second text followed. It says, "I agree if I don't respond. I never agreed to that." Elena opened the forwarded email. Her own name appeared in the sender line. The language thanked Malik for helping the program expand its community impact through future distribution partners. In smaller type, silence was described as confirmation. Elena had never written it. Daniel returned to the routing computer and opened the administrative log. "Elena." She joined him. The order to disable the auxiliary line had not come from a shared management account. The system displayed the individual authorization token, M. Cole. Daniel looked across the hall at Martin and the unsigned transfer folder beneath his arm. "He did not schedule maintenance," Daniel said. "He scheduled silence." The individual authorization token changed the shape of the evening. Until that moment, Elena could still have told herself Martin was rushing a bad contract and trusting people he should not trust. The order to disable the auxiliary line was different. It was deliberate, timed, hidden behind a word as harmless as maintenance. Daniel copied the routing log to a secured drive. "If he asks, I was checking latency," he said. "You could lose your job. I could lose it for doing nothing, too." Martin had disappeared into the conference room with the white folder. A woman Elena did not recognize entered through the side door carrying a leather case. Ruth Caldwell followed her. Ruth served as the station's board secretary and compliance officer, handling the rules nobody considered until something went wrong. She wore gray suits, kept exact minutes, and had once stopped a charity broadcast because a sponsor agreement used the wrong legal name. "Elena," Ruth said, "Martin told me you still have not signed the archive acknowledgement." "It is not an acknowledgement." The woman stopped at the conference room door. "This is Marin Holt," Ruth said. "She represents North Coast Media Partners." Marin offered a hand. "We are excited about what your program could become." "What does your company believe it is becoming?" "A broader platform for community voices." "Using whose permission?" Martin opened the door before Marin could answer. "We are not doing this in the hallway." The meeting was not supposed to include Elena, but the glass wall left only the soundproofing between her and the people discussing 10 years of her work. Martin placed a presentation on the screen, Audience Migration Strategy. A chart divided listeners by age, income, occupation, and neighborhood. Elena could not hear every sentence, but certain phrases carried whenever Martin raised his voice. Archive conversion. Cross-platform growth. Trust retention. Bianca entered without knocking and took the chair beside Marin. Ruth opened a thin packet. "Where is the content rights appendix?" Martin answered first. "Legal is finalizing it." The board summary refers to a complete archive transfer. It refers to transferable station assets. Ruth looked toward the glass wall. "That is not the same phrase." Marin leaned forward. Her voice was too low to carry, but Martin's answer did. Elena agreed in principle. Elena set down the anniversary card in her hand. She had agreed to digitize aging tapes and make old programs searchable for guests who wanted copies. She had never agreed to transfer control of the archive. Bianca slid a page toward Ruth. Even through the glass, Elena recognized the station letterhead. Ruth read it once. Sole host? The new format needs one identifiable voice, Bianca said as the door opened briefly. Not co-host. Not transition period. Sole host. Bianca noticed Elena outside. This time, she did not look embarrassed. Daniel appeared beside Elena with a coil of cable over one shoulder. The auxiliary encoder is old, but it still works, he said quietly. If I remove it before the shutdown, the system will think the line is gone. And the line? Still reachable from the production booth. Elena watched Ruth turn another page. Keep it. Daniel studied her face. You think we will need it? I think Martin does. Inside, Marin changed the slide. Regional Expansion Leadership. Martin's name appeared beneath a title Elena had never heard before. Director of Community Portfolio Development. He pointed to it with the satisfaction of someone showing a house he had already purchased. Ruth asked a question. Marin answered. Martin's smile weakened. He searched the packet in front of him. The title was on the presentation. It was not in the agreement. Bianca spoke without turning her head. Martin nodded and recovered, but the moment stayed with Elena. He was negotiating as though he had already been welcomed into a larger organization. They had not even promised him a chair. At 6:18, the conference room door opened. Ruth came out first with the incomplete packet pressed against her side. Elena, did you authorize Martin to represent that all archive releases permit third-party licensing? No. Did you authorize him to say you agreed in principle to the transfer? No. Martin stepped into the hallway. She agreed to modernization. She is splitting language because she is nervous about change. I am reading the language you want me to sign. Marin closed her leather case. This can be resolved after the broadcast. The anniversary should remain positive. Bianca joined them, holding the sole host page against her chest. The audience needs continuity tonight, she said. Elena looked at the page, then at Bianca's new badge. You seem very certain about decisions the board has not seen. Bianca's fingers tightened on the paper. Martin moved between them. At 7, Elena hosts the anniversary. At 9:15, Bianca introduces the future. By midnight, we stop treating this station like a neighborhood hobby. Ruth turned toward him. Midnight? Martin went still. Marin's expression sharpened. The board secretary had not been told there was a deadline. At 6:57, the last commercial before the anniversary broadcast ended. Daniel gave Elena a 3-count through the glass. She settled the headphones over her ears, opened the microphone, and welcomed the city the same way she had for 10 years. She thanked the night shift nurses, restaurant workers closing their kitchens, drivers still on the road, and everyone who had trusted the program with a story they had been afraid to tell elsewhere. The call board filled almost immediately. Rosa Bennett came on first. She laughed about the morning customers had lined up outside her bakery after Elena shared her rent dispute. Malik Grant called from a loading dock and described the strangers who had delivered groceries after his accident. Elena let each person speak longer than the rundown allowed. Martin watched from the rear of the studio. At 7:38, he entered during a musical transition. Daniel lifted one hand, asking whether Elena wanted him to cut Martin's microphone. She shook her head once. Martin stood beside her chair until the music faded. Before we continue, he said, the station has an announcement about the future of this program. Nothing in the approved rundown included an announcement. Martin placed his hand on the back of her chair. This city deserves a program prepared for the next 10 years, not one held in place by the last 10. Behind the glass, the production assistant stopped writing. Ruth, near the control room door, looked at the clock. Elena has made a meaningful contribution, Martin continued. But community media cannot survive if one person refuses every form of growth. Several call lights remained active. The waiting listeners could hear him. Elena moved toward the microphone. Martin reached it first and lowered the fader beneath her fingers. Then he removed the headphones from her head. The movement was calm, almost ceremonial. He laid them on the desk and faced the viewing window, where sponsors, former guests, and employees had gathered. Effective tonight, Bianca Vale will lead the program into its next chapter. Bianca entered before anyone could pretend to be surprised. She wore the silver headset Elena had seen in Studio B and a laminated host credential. Martin lifted Elena's microphone from its arm and placed it in Bianca's hand. A few people in the viewing area clapped. One stopped when she realized no one else had joined. Bianca sat in Elena's chair. "Good evening," she began, using Elena's familiar pause. "Wherever you are in this city, there is room for your story here." The sentence reached Elena with more force than Martin's speech. Bianca had not borrowed a greeting. She had practiced an inheritance. Elena looked toward the rundown beside the console. The archive conversion folder lay open beneath it. Rosa Bennett's release was marked approved. So was Malik Grant's. Elena had read Malik's refusal less than an hour earlier. She reached for the folder. Martin closed it. "This is station property. Those approvals are false." His expression shifted. He had expected anger, not precision. "Do not turn a professional transition into a personal scene. You sent forms under my name." Martin raised his microphone fader. "Elena is understandably emotional. We ask everyone listening to respect her privacy while the station completes this transition." He had chosen the sentence carefully. It made every objection sound like the reaction of an abandoned wife. Elena looked through the glass at Daniel. His hand hovered above the master cutoff. Ruth moved closer. "Do not alter the primary feed without authorization." Martin motioned to the security guard near the entrance. "Please escort Elena to the lobby." Samuel Price had worked at the station for 4 years. He opened the door but did not touch her. "Elena," he said quietly, "I have to ask you to step out." She stood. Martin appeared relieved until she pointed at the auxiliary channel indicator beneath Daniel's console. A faint green pulse remained. Daniel had removed the encoder from the scheduled routing table. The old line was invisible to the main automation system. "Still live." Elena turned back toward Martin. "Did you tell them what they were agreeing to?" Martin gave a thin smile. "Every recording made by this station belongs to management." The statement went out over the air. Across the city, former guests heard their private memories reduced to station property. Several call lights changed from waiting amber to urgent red. Daniel's eyes moved to the quality monitor recorder. It captured every live microphone before the broadcast delay. Elena noticed, but said nothing. Bianca glanced down at the folder. Her hand stopped on the 9:15 script. Martin followed Elena's gaze and stepped between her and the desk. "Enough." Elena walked out without reaching for the headphones he had taken from her. As the door closed, Bianca began reading sponsor copy in a voice that sounded almost like Elena's, except where empathy had been replaced by timing. The words followed Elena into the hallway. For one breath, the loss arrived without strategy. 10 years of late-night calls, handwritten permissions, and voices she had carried home after the red light went dark, compressed into a chair Bianca had occupied for less than a minute. Then, Elena saw the urgent red lights multiplying through the glass. Those callers were not asking her to defend her marriage or recover her microphone. They were calling because their names were inside Martin's folder. She allowed herself one breath to grieve what had been taken. On the next, she followed Daniel toward the production booth. If Martin wanted the city to hear only his version, Elena would begin with the people whose consent he had erased. Daniel waited 3 seconds. Then he routed the auxiliary line to the unused production booth at the end of the hall. Elena reached the booth as its call screen came alive. 1 caller, then 4, then 11. Rosa's name appeared first. Martin had taken control of the main studio, but the people whose stories filled his archive had begun calling the line he thought no longer existed. Rosa Bennett did not begin by defending Elena. She began with a date. March 14th, 5 years ago, she said through the auxiliary line. "That is when I signed the release." Elena sat in the unused production booth with Daniel beside the door and the old encoder humming beneath the console. The room had no window into Studio A. All they could see was the call screen and a meter showing that their signals still reached the station's monitoring network. "Do you have the form with you?" Elena asked. I keep every paper that almost cost me my bakery. Seconds later, a photograph arrived in Daniel's inbox. The release allowed WCRN to broadcast Rose's interview during Elena's program, repeat it on the station's own schedule, and use short excerpts to promote that episode. Nothing mentioned permanent licensing, political advertising, or transfer to another company. Elena read the relevant sentence aloud. She did not tell listeners what conclusion to reach. She let the language stand beside Martin's claim that every voice belonged to management. Last week, I received an email asking me to approve expanded community reach, Rosa said. I asked who would use it. Nobody answered. This afternoon, another email said I had approved. Daniel opened the archive spreadsheet. Rosa Bennett approved. Beside it was a note. No objection received. Silence had not merely been misunderstood. It had been entered as consent. The second caller was Malik Grant. I answered them, he said over the sound of traffic. I wrote no. Daniel found his name. Malik Grant approved. The note read, existing release sufficient. Elena asked Daniel to preserve both entries. Malik, do you give us permission to discuss the email and the status attached to your name? Yes. The email and the status, not the accident recording. Understood. That is the whole problem, Malik said. Because I trusted you once, they think I agreed to everything forever. In Studio A, Bianca's sponsor segment ended abruptly. Martin's voice replaced hers. An unauthorized transmission is interfering with this station's anniversary broadcast. Miss Ruiz no longer has authority to represent WCRN, and callers are being encouraged to create confusion around routine archival procedures. Daniel lowered the monitor volume. He found us. He found the signal, Elena said. Not the route. Her phone rang from Ruth Caldwell's number. Elena, stop transmitting. Have you seen Rosa's original release? This is not how a compliance review is conducted. Martin is using a live broadcast to establish a false version of consent. And you are using station equipment after being removed from the program. The words were cold, but Ruth had not called Elena a liar. Elena looked at the screen. 23 callers were waiting. I will not publish private documents, she said. I will only let people state what they agreed to. You cannot verify every caller in real time. No. But you can preserve the records before someone changes them. Daniel pointed to a new alert. A bulk update had begun. Rows in the archive spreadsheet were changing from pending to approved. Ruth, someone is altering the consent list now. The line stayed open. In the background, Elena heard Ruth enter a room and order that all archive permissions be locked. Martin answered from farther away. There is no basis for that. The basis is an active changelog during a dispute. The call ended. Daniel captured the update history before the system froze. Each altered row carried the same administrative source, but the user field had been hidden behind a generic management credential. 41 names had changed in less than 2 minutes. The next caller was Janice Holloway, a home care worker interviewed 3 years earlier. She did not praise Elena or retell her story. She asked, why did the new email mention issue education? Elena searched the copy Malik had forwarded. The phrase appeared near the bottom, buried between digital distribution and community engagement. What did they tell you it meant? They said the form was only for anniversary rebroadcasts. Daniel entered the phrase into the document index. One result appeared. The future of our city issue education framework. Access restricted. Scheduled. 9:15 p.m. The booth clock read A2. 73 minutes remained. Martin returned to the main feed. This station will not allow personal grievances to frighten the people who have supported us. Elena heard the trap. If she attacked him, he would make the story about their marriage. If she speculated about the buyer, he would call her reckless. So she did neither. If your voice is in this archive, ask what you signed, she said. Ask where your recording is going. Ask whether silence was counted as permission. The call board reached capacity. Then a message arrived from the station's legal inbox. Sees EASE, unauthorized contact with represented participants. Martin had copied the board, the buyer's attorney, and every department head. He was no longer trying only to silence Elena. He was building a record that made her look like the violation. At 8:07, Daniel opened the restricted file through the station's internal preview cache. The title page looked harmless. The Future of Our City, Issue Education Framework. Below it, 3 archived interviews had been reduced to timestamps and talking points. Malik's accident story appeared first. The original recording had been 42 minutes long. He had spoken about a damaged loading dock, unpaid medical leave, and the fear of losing his apartment while he recovered. The new script kept 11 seconds. A narrator would introduce Malik as a local worker who learned that economic instability follows when outdated city systems resist private investment. Malik had never discussed private investment. Daniel opened the proposed audio edit. Malik's voice said, "People need work they can count on." The next sentence came from a different part of the interview. "We cannot keep doing things the old way." Between those lines, Malik had originally said the company ignored safety complaints for months. That part was gone. "They built an argument out of his pauses," Daniel said. Elena called Malik. "Before I tell you what we found, what do you permit us to use tonight? My email, my refusal, and the part of my original interview that proves they changed my meaning." Elena wrote the limits on a yellow notepad and read them back. Malik confirmed each one. A second file used Janice Holloway's interview about understaffed home care agencies. Her complaint about exhausted caregivers had been reframed as support for flexible service partnerships. The third belonged to Rosa. A story about surviving a rent increase now ended with a line promoting development-friendly leadership. None of the edits named a candidate. They did not need to. The same phrases appeared in campaign advertisements across the city. Daniel searched the advertising archive. A media order submitted by Civic Horizon Strategies used identical language. The payment had been classified as production support rather than political sponsorship. Martin had approved it. At 8:19, Ruth entered the booth. "Turn off the auxiliary transmission." Elena moved away from the microphone but kept the recording system active. "Have you seen the 9:15 script? I have seen enough to know you are using equipment management ordered retired." Daniel turned his monitor toward her. Ruth read Malik's transcript beside the edited version. Her expression narrowed. "Who created this?" "The metadata points to Civic Horizon," Daniel said. The file arrived at 5:42. "This was not in the board packet." "Neither was the midnight deadline," Elena said. Ruth looked at her. "Missing information is not proof of a conspiracy. I am asking you to stop 3 altered stories from airing." Ruth noticed the yellow notepad. "What is that?" "The exact material each person permits us to use." "You confirmed this before playing anything?" "I promised them control." Ruth copied the file number and left without offering support. At 8:31, Bianca promoted the coming segment on the main feed. The promo ended with Rosa saying, "We cannot be afraid of change." Rosa called immediately. "That is my voice, but that is not what I meant." Daniel found the uncut statement. "We cannot be afraid of change," Rosa had said, "but change should not mean losing everything we built." The missing half reversed the meaning. At 8:38, Garrison Pharmacy, the station's largest local sponsor, called Martin. Its owner wanted to know why the company's name appeared beside a segment it had never approved. Martin described the broadcast as nonpartisan civic education. He insisted there was no political sponsor. Daniel pointed to the Civic Horizon order. At 8:44, his login expired. Then Elena's credentials disappeared. Martin was removing access one account at a time. Daniel disconnected the booth computer before the local preview cache could be erased. "We have the files," he said. "We do not control the main playlist." A message arrived from Ruth. "Do not transmit further, preserve everything. Do not delete the local cache." It was not an offer of help, but it was no longer an order to surrender the evidence. At 8:52, a new file entered the main playlist. "The Future of Our City Final." Daniel compared it with the preview version. A fourth voice had been added. Elena recognized her own words from the program's 5th anniversary. "Trust begins when people believe the voice speaking to them." Martin was using Elena to endorse the message that would replace her. The clock changed to 9:08. Daniel could no longer alter the playlist. but the old encoder retained one manual interrupt path used for emergency verification. One use. After that, the system would identify the hardware and shut it down. Elena called Malik, Rosa, and Janice together. "We can interrupt the segment with the original recordings," she said. "Only if each of you agrees." "Play the truth beside the edit," Malik answered. "Use the full sentence," Rosa said. Janice waited, then added, "Use my words." Not their version. At 9:14, Bianca opened her microphone. Daniel placed one hand over the interrupt control. "Tonight," Bianca began, "we listened to the voices that built this city." Daniel pressed the switch. The prepared music stopped. Malik's unedited voice filled the station. "The company knew that Doc was unsafe. We reported it 3 times. Martin lunged toward the console, but the city had already heard the sentence they had paid to remove. Malik's sentence remained on the air for 6 full seconds. Then the main feed cut to silence. Daniel's emergency interrupt light went dark. A warning appeared across the console. "Unauthorized hardware detected." The old encoder had identified itself. Martin entered the production booth before the system finished shutting down. He did not raise his voice. "You are both suspended," he said. Daniel stayed between him and the disconnected computer. "Preserve the cache," Ruth called from the hallway. Martin turned. "This is an internal broadcast failure. It became a compliance matter when altered testimony went live." Bianca appeared behind him, still wearing Elena's headphones. Her expression had shifted from polished confidence to calculation. "The audience heard one sentence," she said. "We can correct it." "Elena's audience will believe whatever the station tells them next," Martin answered. Elena understood what he had never understood about the program. Martin thought trust was attached to a frequency, a logo, and a familiar hour. He believed it could be transferred because he had never been the person asked to earn it. Ruth held out her hand. "The complete North Coast agreement." Martin did not move. "You have the board summary." "I asked for the agreement." Maren Holt stepped from the conference room with her leather case closed. "The remaining schedules contain proprietary strategy. Then the board has been asked to approve an agreement it has not reviewed. The transaction concerns station assets." Ruth pointed toward the silent booth. "Those assets are now disputed." Bianca said, "Give her the schedules." Martin looked at her, not for permission, but for explanation. Maren opened a password-protected tablet. Ruth read while Elena and Daniel remained inside the booth. The first schedules listed equipment, trademarks, rebroadcast rights, and sponsorship inventory. The next one was different. Audience intelligence and trust conversion assets. It included listener email addresses, caller histories, neighborhood profiles, response patterns, donation records, and engagement scores tied to public concerns. Housing, wages, transportation, healthcare access. Small business closures. The categories were not organized around service. They were organized around persuasion. Ruth scrolled farther. "Trusted message integration," she read. "Segment-specific issue framing. Host continuity requirement." Elena looked at Bianca. "The host requirement is you." Bianca folded her arms. "A platform needs consistency." "This is not a platform plan," Elena said. "It is an influence map." Maren closed the tablet halfway. "That is an inflammatory interpretation." Daniel pointed to another line. "Predictive audience conversion." Beside it was a target percentage. The buyer was not measuring how many people listened. It was measuring how many could be moved. Ruth opened another schedule. The transfer granted North Coast and its unnamed affiliates the right to create new material using archived voices, listener profiles, and synthetic or reconstructed presentation elements derived from prior broadcasts. "They can rebuild voices," Elena said. "For continuity and accessibility," Maren replied. "Without calling the person? Where permitted by the release. The releases do not permit it." Martin stepped closer. "You are treating standard media language like a crime because you do not understand scale. No, you are treating people like raw material because you never listened to them." Bianca moved between them. "This program stayed small because Elena wanted every caller to feel personally protected. That is not sustainable." The contempt in her voice was quieter than Martin's, but cleaner. At the bottom of the host's schedule, Ruth found a payment authorization to Vale Narrative Consulting. The amount exceeded Bianca's annual station salary. The payer was Meridian Civic Ventures, an intermediary sharing an address with Civic Horizon, the company behind the 915 script. Bianca looked at Marin. That was not supposed to be in the station copy. Martin turned toward her. You are being paid separately? It is consulting work. For what? Transition planning. You told me North Coast wanted us to lead this together. Bianca answered too slowly. Marin stepped in. Personal compensation is outside tonight's review. Martin reached for the tablet, but Ruth pulled it away. Another line sat beneath the payment schedule. Management representations and warranties. Martin Cole. Every certification about consent, archive ownership, and legal authority carried his name. If those certifications were false, the buyer could withdraw without liability. Martin stared at the signature block. This was supposed to be revised. Marin said nothing. He searched Bianca's face for reassurance and found only impatience, as if his confusion had become another delay. Ruth photographed the page before Marin could scroll past it. He had believed he was selling the program. The contract treated him as the person guaranteeing that the product was clean. Ruth opened the final appendix. A calendar of proposed content extended 3 months beyond the local election. Each week paired archived community stories with topics already appearing in campaign advertising. No candidate was named. But the sequence was deliberate. A housing story before a zoning vote. A crime segment before a public safety debate. A small business feature beside a development proposal. The program's credibility would carry the message without admitting who had paid for it. Martin looked at Marin. You said this was audience expansion. It is. You said they wanted the show. They want what the show can move. The sentence came from Ruth. At 9:27, the station's legal inbox received a new message. North Coast requested immediate confirmation that all archive rights were valid and that no employee dispute threatened the transfer. Martin's certification was due at 10 p.m. If the board did not suspend the transaction before midnight, the archive rights, listener data, and licensing schedules would transfer automatically. Elena looked at the clock. 33 minutes. The 9:15 segment had been stopped, but the larger transaction was already demanding proof that the people inside it could be sold. At 9:31, Martin asked everyone except Bianca, Marin, and Ruth to leave the conference room. Elena remained in the hallway with Daniel. Their credentials had been revoked, and Samuel stood near the elevator with orders not to let them back into Studio A. The main broadcast resumed with recorded anniversary clips. Then Martin went live. Elena Ruiz has had a deeply personal reaction to a routine transition, Martin said. Her unauthorized use of station systems has created confusion, and out of respect for her privacy, we will not discuss our marriage. The wording was gentle enough to sound protective. A confidentiality warning reached employees at the same time, turning disagreement into a possible violation. Martin was not merely defending himself, he was organizing silence around his version. Daniel listened through a hallway speaker. He practiced that. No, Elena said. He has practiced explaining me for years. A message arrived from the station's outside counsel. Elena and Daniel were ordered to stop contacting former guests, surrender copied files, and preserve their devices for legal review. The letter warned that interference with the North Coast transaction could expose them to financial damages. Martin had copied the board and the buyer. He was creating a second story beside the first. In one, he had failed to verify consent. In the other, Elena had frightened people into withdrawing it. At 9:38, Rosa sent a screenshot of a new station email. It advised guests not to change their permissions because calls from unauthorized individuals might contain misleading information. They are telling people their own decisions are misinformation, Elena said. Inside the conference room, Ruth refused to sign Martin's draft certification. Elena heard fragments whenever the door opened. The board has not reviewed the schedules. Existing releases remain disputed. I will not certify what I cannot verify. At 9:43, Bianca entered the hallway, carrying a single-page document. You could have made this easier, she told Elena. North Coast was prepared to preserve the program's identity. With you as the only voice. With a host who understands scale. You mean one who does not ask where the words came from. Bianca stepped closer. You gave people a place to speak. That does not mean you own every meaning their stories can create. Neither do you. Bianca glanced toward Marin's leather case, not toward Martin. Did they choose you before you met him? Elena asked. Bianca's grip tightened on the page. Martin opened the conference room door. Bianca. She handed him the document. Management representations and warranties. Martin scanned the first paragraph. Ruth followed him out. Do not sign that. The buyer needs confirmation by 10, he said. The buyer needs someone to carry the liability. Martin looked at Marin. These are standard assurances based on information management already provided, Marin said. Bianca touched Martin's arm. Sign it, and they can continue without pausing the deal. What about the board call? We will explain everything before 11:30. The word we settled him. Martin still believed he and Bianca stood on the same side of the table. He signed at 9:49. Ruth photographed the document before Marin took it. The certification stated that all archive permissions were valid, no material disputes existed, and every disclosed use complied with station policy. A clause below Martin's signature allowed the buyer to withdraw and seek damages if any representation proved false. North Coast accepted it at 9:51. Martin looked almost restored. He forwarded the confirmation to every employee with one added sentence. Elena Ruiz and Daniel Shaw are not authorized to speak for this station. Samuel approached them reluctantly. I have to take your access cards. Daniel handed his over. Elena removed hers from the lanyard. The photograph had been taken 9 years earlier, after the program moved to weeknights. Beneath her name were the words host and content editor. Not rights officer, not counsel, not owner. For years, Elena had believed the care she took with people would protect them after the microphone turned off. She checked every edit, remembered every promise, and trusted Martin to build the paperwork around those promises. He had not stolen that trust alone. She had left too much of it unwritten. I should have demanded clearer releases years ago, she said. Daniel shook his head. Do not turn his choice into your confession. I am not excusing him. I am finding the part I can change. Ruth returned to the conference room and opened the station's document history. The certification had been uploaded that evening. Another file shared its title. Management Responsibility Statement Contingency Draft. Created 3 days earlier. Ruth opened it. The first paragraph stated that North Coast had relied exclusively on representations made by Martin Cole and had never authorized misuse of guest recordings, political messaging, or incomplete disclosures. It was not a response to the crisis. It had been prepared before the anniversary broadcast. Ruth looked through the glass at Martin. He had just signed the agreement that made the draft useful. At 10:04, Ruth Caldwell stopped treating the document history as an internal irregularity. She exported the metadata to a board-controlled archive and printed the access trail. The contingency statement had been created 72 hours before Martin removed Elena's headphones. Its author field belonged to Marin Holt's firm. Its first review came from the same intermediary account linked to Civic Horizon. The crisis had not surprised the buyer. It had been priced into the transaction. Ruth found Elena and Daniel in the lobby, where Samuel had orders to keep them until outside counsel decided whether their devices would be collected. Do you still have the local cash? Ruth asked. Daniel nodded. Do not send it, post it, or give it to former guests. Give me a checksum and a read-only copy. I am opening a formal preservation file for the board. Daniel looked at Elena. On one condition, she said. Preserve the original consent records beside the altered versions. All versions, Ruth replied, including the bulk update history. It was not an apology. It was a procedure Martin could no longer control. At 10:16, Ruth issued a board hold covering the archive server, contract files, call recordings, sponsor orders, payroll entries, and communications with North Coast, Civic Horizon, and Bianca's consulting company. Martin called within seconds. You do not have authority to freeze executive communications. I have authority to preserve material relevant to a disputed board transaction. You are helping Elena sabotage the station. I am preventing anyone from deciding later which records survived. He ended the call. Daniel created the read-only copy under Ruth's supervision. It included Martin's recorded claim that every voice belonged to management, the altered 9:15 script, Malik's unedited statement, and the payment order tied to Bianca's consulting company. Ruth logged each item separately. You believed him earlier, Elena said. I believed the station could survive this if everyone followed process. And now? Now, I believe someone designed the process so the wrong person would sign the last page. Ruth still did not say she believed Elena about everything. She did not need to. At 10:29, production assistant Chloe Mercer appeared at the lobby doors. She was 26 and knew enough to fear every manager, but old enough to recognize when silence became participation. I need to tell someone what Bianca asked me to do. Ruth brought her into the records room. 3 weeks earlier, Bianca had given Chloe anniversary scripts and asked her to recreate Elena's opening, closing, and caller transitions in a new template. Bianca said Martin wanted an emergency backup. Did you know Elena was being replaced? Ruth asked. No. Not then. When did you know? Monday. Bianca told me to change every future rundown so only one host field remained. Chloe produced a scheduling screenshot. The template change predated Martin's announcement by 4 days. Why did you keep it? Elena asked. Because Bianca told me to delete the version history. The screenshot did not reveal who owned North Coast. It proved the replacement had been planned while Martin still promised an anniversary honoring Elena's work. Ruth added Chloe's statement to the file. At 10:41, Bianca locked herself in the staff restroom and answered an encrypted call. If the board suspends closing, leave the building, a man said. What about the tablet? Remove it, Martin signed. And my position? There is no position if the transaction fails. A car will wait at the east entrance at 11:20. The line went dead. Bianca had treated Martin as disposable. Only then did she understand that she was disposable too. Bianca returned to the conference room and began collecting documents she had earlier called station property. Chloe saw her from the copy room and texted Ruth. Bianca is packing files. East entrance. Ruth showed Elena and Daniel. Do not confront her. Samuel will secure the exit, and I will request the tablet through the preservation order. If she refuses? Daniel asked. Then the refusal becomes part of the record. At 10:53, Martin received the board hold and marched toward the records room with Marin behind him. This meeting ends now, he said. Ruth, release the files. Ruth closed the evidence ledger. The board meeting begins at 11:30. Until then, nothing leaves. Marin's phone vibrated. She read the screen, shut her leather case, and stepped away from Martin. That movement told Elena enough. The people behind the deal were already creating distance. At the far end of the corridor, Bianca approached the east exit with the tablet hidden beneath her coat. The lobby clock read 11:02. 28 minutes remained before the board meeting. And the first person paid to replace Elena was preparing to disappear before anyone could ask who had sent her. At 11:29, the boardroom screen came alive. 3 directors joined remotely. 2 sat beside Ruth at the conference table. Marin occupied the far end with her leather case closed. Martin took the chair nearest the camera. Bianca stood near the east door, her tablet sealed in an evidence bag after Samuel stopped her from leaving. Elena and Daniel entered as witnesses, not employees. Martin began before Ruth finished calling the meeting to order. This is a domestic dispute contaminating a legitimate transaction, Martin said. Elena agreed to modernization, then used station equipment to frighten guests into withdrawing consent after learning Bianca would replace her. Marin added that North Coast had relied on station management and had never requested political content or unauthorized use of personal stories. Bianca folded her hands. The new segment was civic education. Elena calls it manipulation because she cannot accept that the program can continue without her. Martin placed his signed certification on the table. There is no material rights dispute. I certified that before 10. For a moment, he had the version of the evening he wanted. A jealous wife, a disloyal technician, and a necessary transition attacked by people afraid of change. Ruth opened the evidence ledger. Then we begin with the releases. She projected the original releases from Rosa, Malik, and Janice. Each permitted use within Elena's program and station rebroadcasts. None allowed third-party transfer. Beside them, the approval spreadsheet showed 41 records changed during the dispute, some because silence had been treated as consent, others despite written refusal. Martin leaned back. Administrative cleanup. Daniel displayed the change log. All 41 changes had been made in 98 seconds through a management credential. You cannot prove who used it. No, Ruth said. But we can prove the board was never told the records were disputed. Ruth then played Martin's live statement. Every recording made by this station belongs to management. She stopped the file. That claim is broader than the releases and the board summary. I was speaking in operational terms. Elena answered from the witness chair. You were speaking to people whose names had already been marked approved. Ruth moved to the 9:15 script. Malik's edited version removed his safety complaints and joined two separate sentences into support for private investment. Rosa's shortened line followed. We cannot be afraid of change. Then the complete sentence played. We cannot be afraid of change, but change should not mean losing everything we built. No one needed Elena to explain the difference. Martin pointed at Daniel. He altered the broadcast. I interrupted an altered recording with the original after the speaker gave permission, Daniel said. Using retired equipment. Equipment you scheduled to disable before replacing Elena. Ruth displayed the routing order bearing Martin's authorization token. The first wave of Martin's story had depended on Elena looking irrational. The documents made the planning look deliberate. Marin opened her case. North Coast cannot be responsible for internal management decisions. Ruth projected the hidden schedules, listener profiles, response categories, predictive conversion targets, and rights to create reconstructed presentation elements. A director unmuted himself. Were we asked to approve synthetic use of archived voices? No, Ruth said. That schedule was omitted. Marin replied that the language depended on valid releases. Which Martin certified, Bianca said. Attention turned toward him. Ruth displayed his signature, then opened the contingency statement created 3 days earlier by Marin's firm and reviewed through the intermediary linked to Civic Horizon. It said North Coast had relied exclusively on Martin's representations and had never authorized incomplete disclosures, political messaging, or misuse of recordings. Martin read the creation date twice. You prepared this before tonight. Contingency documents are common, Marin said. You expected the rights to fail. We expected management to verify them. Martin turned to Bianca. You knew? Ruth displayed the payment to Vale Narrative Consulting and the shared address linking Bianca's company to Civic Horizon through the intermediary. Bianca, what services were you paid to provide? Transition planning. Before or after your relationship with Martin began? Bianca looked toward the sealed tablet. Chloe Mercer joined by video and confirmed that Bianca had ordered future schedules changed to a single host format 4 days before Elena's removal, then asked her to delete the version history. Martin stared at Bianca. Your father said you would take the program and I would run the regional network. Bianca's face hardened. My family gave you an opportunity. I told you what you needed to finish the transfer. The board microphones caught every word. At 11:48, Ruth connected verified former guests to the meeting. Rosa spoke first. I do not permit this station to sell my story, rebuild my voice, or attach my bakery to a campaign. Malik followed. I am not asking anyone to save Elena's job. I am saying my accident does not belong in an argument I never made. Janice limited her permission to the original episode and station rebroadcasts. Others followed with specific terms. No political advertising, no synthetic voice, no third-party licensing. No assumption that silence meant yes. The archive stopped looking like an asset list. It became a record of people withdrawing the convenience Martin had promised the buyer. Bianca tried once more. They do not understand how modern media works. Rosa answered. We understand the word no. Marin's phone vibrated. She read the message and closed the contract folder. North Coast is suspending participation pending review. We reject any suggestion that our client directed unauthorized conduct. Martin called the negotiation number. A disconnected message recording answered. He tried another. No response. At 11:54, Marin emailed formal notice that Martin had acted beyond verified authority and that North Coast reserved all rights against him. The contingency draft had existed before he signed. He had stepped exactly where they had prepared to leave him. The board chair called an emergency vote. Transfer suspended. Archive frozen. Independent review authorized. Martin removed from operational control pending investigation. Bianca's appointment revoked. The motion passed at 11:58. Through the glass, the call board still pulsed. Rosa, Malik, and Janice remained connected, waiting not for Elena's reinstatement but for confirmation that their records had been frozen. Ruth read the motion back into the minutes. Daniel watched the archive status change from transfer pending to board hold. Only then did Rosa exhale over the speaker. No one cheered. The victory was too close to what had almost happened. Employees removed Bianca's host credential from the studio door, and Samuel sealed Martin's access card in the evidence envelope beside the tablet. Elena looked at the microphone Martin had taken from her. For the first time that night, it was only a piece of equipment again. The people behind the voices had recovered the right to decide what happened next. A director asked Elena whether she wanted immediate reinstatement. She looked through the glass toward Studio A. Her headphones still rested beside the microphone. No, not until every person in that archive is notified, every permission is reviewed, and the station stops treating trust as something management can transfer. Martin lifted his head. You are destroying the program. Elena faced him. No, I am refusing to let you sell the people who made it matter. At midnight, nothing transferred. The station remained standing. Only Martin's claim that he owned its voices had collapsed. The investigation lasted 6 weeks. During that time, WCRN remained on the air under board supervision. Every archived release was reviewed. Former guests received letters explaining what the station held and how they could restrict or withdraw future use. Martin was removed from operational control after the board confirmed that he had hidden refusals, misrepresented archive rights, and signed certifications he could not support. North Coast denied directing him, while the intermediary companies dissolved or changed names before investigators could identify the final owner. Bianca's appointment remained revoked. The review confirmed that she had accepted separate payment, ordered Chloe to delete version history, and tried to remove the tablet after the preservation hold began. WCRN referred those findings to outside counsel and demanded that Vail Narrative Consulting return its advance. Bianca left the city 2 days after the board meeting, no longer protected by North Coast or the intermediaries tied to her family. The wider network remained hidden behind shell companies and consultants who claimed they had only followed instructions. WCRN offered Elena her old position. The board chair met her in Studio A and promised new consent procedures and a public apology. Her headphones still rested in the drawer where Daniel had placed them after the anniversary broadcast. Elena did not open it. I believe you want to repair the station, she said. But I cannot rebuild trust inside the same structure that treated it like inventory. The board chair asked whether that was her final answer. It is my first honest one. Daniel resigned the following morning. 3 months later, they rented 2 rooms above Rosa Bennett's bakery. One became a studio. The other held a desk, a folding table, and shelves for consent records every guest could read before speaking. They named the program Common Ground. There was no archive transfer clause hidden behind vague language. Every guest chose where an episode could appear, whether excerpts could be used, and whether future requests required new permission. Daniel built a portal that allowed people to review or change those choices. Malik became the first guest. He did not retell the accident. He spoke about hearing his own voice used to support something he had never said. Janice discussed the difference between being quoted and being represented. Rosa brought pastries for the first broadcast and refused to leave until Elena ate one. The program grew slowly. That mattered to Elena. She no longer measured success by how quickly a voice could travel. She measured it by whether the person behind that voice still recognized it when it returned. Martin heard about Common Ground through former employees. He sent Elena one message, asking whether they could speak privately. When she answered, she wrote only that any conversation about the archive would need to include counsel and the people whose stories had been affected. There was no cruelty in the reply. There was also no door left open for him to walk through alone. On the morning of Common Ground's first election season broadcast, Daniel found a lucrative proposal from a newly registered media company. It wanted local workers and shop owners in a series framed as community storytelling. The contract contained a phrase he recognized: trusted message integration. Daniel turned his screen toward Elena. Same people? Maybe. We cannot prove it. We do not need to. She clicked decline. On the shelf beside the console sat the headphones Martin had removed during the anniversary broadcast. Daniel had repaired the cracked padding, but left the scratch across the left ear cup. Elena lifted them and set them on the desk, not on her head. Every guest now had a headset of their own. Rosa waited in one booth. Malik sat in another. Janice adjusted her microphone and reviewed the permission screen one last time. Elena checked each green confirmation before taking her seat. Daniel raised his hand above the control panel. Ready? Elena looked through the glass at the people who had once trusted her with their stories and now held the controls beside their own names. Yes. Daniel switched on the red light. On air. Elena leaned toward the microphone. Wherever you are in this city, your story still belongs to you.